Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about the major storylines of the weekend. We had James Franklin get fired from Penn State, a weird time over there in State College, and a lot of things to figure out, both financially and just do you make the right hire going forward. Indiana put on the performance of the weekend. Alabama gets a huge win on the road, and a number of other things coming right now. We have a number of statement wins from this past weekend that we just got to get into. And the first one, we're going to start down there in Dallas. Texas beats Oklahoma 23-6 in Red River. This is one that Texas needed really, really badly. There were two teams this weekend that needed to get off the mat and get a massive win. One went down to Dallas and beat their bitter rival, who was ranked number 6 in the country. The other one lost to Northwestern and fired their head coach. So two different directions in this weekend for Texas and Penn State, but Texas dominated the second half, outscoring Oklahoma 20-0, outgaining them 188-68, including a punt return from Ryan Niblett that totally changed this one with maybe a few questionable blocks. I'll leave it at that for the time being because no changing it at this point, but definitely one that he might have gotten a little bit of help on. But Arch Manning looked the part. He looked better than he has all the entire year. A lot of that was the game plan from Steve Sarkisian. Got the ball out of his hands very quickly. Didn't allow the O-line to do what the O-line did the week before. Now, they gave up only one sack. Did struggle at times. Definitely, Arch Manning had to make some plays off schedule, and he did a great job of that. Something they're going to have to continue to improve on is that offensive line. The run game really got going in the second half, which is a huge thing if they can keep that going for Texas moving forward. But really good game plan from Steve Sarkisian was executed nearly flawlessly from Arch Manning. I think it's exactly what the Texas offense needed, but Trey Wisner was the best player on the football field. Arch Manning was great. Trey Wisner was everything. He went for over 100 total yards, 27 touches on the day, and he did something that not a lot of Texas players have done this year. He made guys miss. There were not a lot of guys, and frankly, the wide receivers didn't really do it in this game. It's really hard to make Oklahoma players miss, but at the end of the day, Trey Wisner ran through tackles. He made a couple of guys miss on some huge catches. He was the guy that totally ignited this Texas offense and gave them enough to win this game. It was never going to be pretty against the Oklahoma defense. It rarely is, but at the end of the day, they were able to figure this thing out. If that's the Texas that we get in the second half going forward, if the second half that we saw from Texas is what we get going forward, that team can make the CFP. Now, they're walking a tightrope. There's no doubt about that. Could they make it at 9-3? I think is a little bit up for debate, and we'll see how that develops throughout the rest of the season. But at the end of the day, they get Kentucky this weekend in Lexington, which is always a little bit more sketchy than it should be. Mississippi State in Starkville, and then Vanderbilt at home. They win those three games, go into the bye week at 7-2. Then they get Georgia, Arkansas, and A&M at the end. You go 2-1 in those, you might be in good shape. You go 3-0, you're definitely in the CFP. So a lot still on the table for Texas. Now, a lot still have to be done, and a lot better football that needs to be played going forward. You need to continue to kind of develop this offense, continue to press the right buttons in that defense, just continue to be that defense. But overall, a massive win for them. For John Mateer, he was all over the place in this game. I think he's going to be fine. He was very hurt. It was very obvious. He was bleeding kind of all over the place throughout that football game. I don't think it's all that crazy. The Texas defense is a nightmare to deal with already. When you're worrying about your hand the entire time, it doesn't get a whole lot better. So I don't think it's all that worrisome. I think Oklahoma's in good shape now. It's a really tough schedule the rest of the way. So they could very well miss the CFP and still be playing really good football, but I think those fans really want a CFP berth. So we'll see what happens the rest of the way. They get South Carolina this weekend in Columbia, so got to make it through that one. If you do, then it's a really tough end of the season, but absolutely could still be a CFP team at the end of it. Texas just owned the day, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and then Arch Manning made enough plays at the end of this one and gave a little bit of wave to the Sooner fans as they walked out. But an incredible game from Texas, one they badly needed, and now they move forward, just having to continue that clip. If they can get to the bye week at 7-2, a lot still on the table for the Texas Longhorns. Michigan loses in dominating fashion, I should say. USC beats Michigan 31-13. This is the one that Lincoln Riley's been waiting on. Now, the real one he's been waiting on comes this weekend, and we'll talk about that in a second. But at the end of the day, they physically dominated the team that has defined physicality in the Big 12 in the Big 10 over the last couple of years. Michigan has been the team. When you think about physicality in that conference, you think about the Michigan Wolverines, then you think about Ohio State, then you think about Penn State. no longer the case for very obvious reasons. USC dominated this game. The story of the game is walk-on King Miller. Went for 18 carries, 158 yards, 1 touchdown. Sounds like their top 2 guys are going to be out this upcoming weekend for Notre Dame, so he's going to have to make a lot of plays. There's no doubt about that. A lot of pressure on that kid's shoulders, but it's a really special thing to watch. We'll see what happens going on with that. But Michigan lost Justice Haynes. That's a huge thing here. Definitely something that it sounds like he's going to be back this weekend, but without him at 100%, this offense is definitely a little bit hampered and is definitely a little bit hamstrung, and I think it's going to really hurt them moving forward if Justice Haynes cannot get back on the field. But this is going to be a really interesting thing to watch. I think this could be one that Michigan really wants back. I don't think they're necessarily going to spiral. I don't think it's going to be terrible, but they get Washington this upcoming weekend. They lose that one, then it's pretty much do you win the Ohio State game or not? And that's obviously one that they've been pretty good at the last couple of years, but we'll see what happens the rest of the season. I think Michigan's still in it. I think this could be the one that ends up keeping them out of the CFP when it's all said and done. But has a doable schedule. We'll see what happens there. USC gets Notre Dame this weekend. That's the one. If they find a way to win that football game, then they are firmly in the mix for the CFP moving forward. If they beat Nebraska the week after that, then they might be the absolute favorite right behind Ohio State and Indiana to get in from the Big Ten. So an incredible performance from a team that had kind of been waiting for this moment, had been waiting for the one where they get to run the football all the time, they get to dominate physically, and they were able to do that. A bigger test this weekend against Notre Dame. If they pass that one, then you could very well see USC in the CFP for the very first time in college football history. It would be a little bit wild, but absolutely a team that has playing really, really good football. Just got to overcome some injuries and find your way to the end of the road. Georgia wins a game 20-10. This is a tough one to talk about for a number of reasons. I think the biggest one is the refereeing in the sport is so uniquely bad. It can't even be described. And the thing about this sport is it's very rich. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of people that would be more than happy to help this get fixed. There would be a lot of money that could be poured into this thing that is not being poured in right now. There's a lot of people that would be really qualified to do this that are not doing it right now. I don't know what we're doing. And I want to say this very, very clearly. It was a fumble when he was going in for the touchdown. I feel very confident in that. Actually, anyone who tells you they feel 100% confident that it was a fumble or a touchdown, they're lying to you. It was very much up for debate. Whatever was called on the field was going to be called at the end of the day. It was called a fumble. It was going to be called a fumble. If it was called a touchdown on the field, it was probably going to end up being a touchdown. That being said, I don't understand how it ends up being Georgia on the 1-yard line. For the life of me, I don't get how that happened. Now, if you're a Georgia fan, I don't think you're really being too mad about that, but at the end of the day, Kyron Jones recovers the ball and runs the other direction for a touchdown. I don't know if it should have been a touchdown. I'm just saying, how does it end up being Georgia on the 1-yard line? I don't get that by any means. That's the weirdest thing in the world to me. The other part of it, Kirby Smart called a timeout. That's plain and simple and very obvious to anyone that has eyes is probably the best way to put it. He was very obviously calling a timeout. There is no argument in the other direction. Him lying in the postgame is something I'm not nearly as mad about as a lot of people I seem to find. Why would he tell them that they made a mistake? What would he have to benefit from telling him that they made a mistake in that moment? They were giving him another timeout in a close game on the road. I'm taking it and running with it. I don't really care if I have to fib a little bit at the postgame to get that timeout. I'm taking the timeout. He was absolutely calling a timeout in that moment. I do think he was telling the refs that Auburn was clapping for a delay a game during the timeout. I have no earthly idea why the ref took it away from him. It should have been a delay a game or a timeout. They messed that up. A lot of energy is being put on Kirby Smart's shoulders for all of this when the energy should be put on the people that are actually making the calls, the people that are not doing their job very effectively right at this moment because they totally lost control of this game and never got it back. It was absolutely terrible from pretty much the 2-minute warning on. It was an absolute nightmare in this football game, and the refs were totally in over their head from start to finish. So all of that can be said. The refs were terrible in this football game. A lot of the calls went in Georgia's direction instead of Auburn's. All of that can be said while still saying the refs didn't take this one from Auburn. Auburn gained 15 yards total after that fumble. I'm sorry, you can't look at me in the face and say that's not Hugh Freeze and Auburn's fault. You just can't. You can't tell me that a team went into halftime, still up 7 points, and came out with that performance in the second half, and it's not their fault. I'm sorry. There's a number of things you can push on the ref's shoulders, and we should push on the ref's shoulders for the incredible amounts of poor calls that they make per week. The reality of the matter is, an elite team, a good team, finds a way to get up and finds a way to put together good drives after the half, especially what they were doing in the first half was working so incredibly well. They didn't do that. They fell short in the second half. They fell flat after that very moment with that fumble. That entire team folded. That's the reality of that situation. Auburn fans are really mad at the refs, and I totally get that. You should be in a lot of cases. You should be a whole lot more mad at your head coach, and that's just the reality of that situation. I think that's kind of coming around the fan base as I've seen the last couple of days. I think a lot of people are starting to understand that maybe the problem is with the headset on, but at the end of the day, this is one of those games where one team responded to the craziness and one team didn't. That's the reality of the situation. Yes, Georgia got a couple of calls that went their direction. I think one of them was not nearly as egregious as people are making it out to be, but at the end of the day, the Georgia team was mentally tough. The Auburn team was not. And I think that's the difference in this football game. As lame as that might sound to some Auburn fans, I think that's the truth. And Gunnar Stockton, I love watching this kid play. He is far from perfect. He is far from the best athlete. He has far from the best arm in the world. He finds a way to get a win. He is more than willing to strap up his chin strap and say, this might be the last time that I do this, because this dude fights for every single yard that he gets, and he makes every single play that he has to make. Diving into the end zone might have been a little bit wrong, and I think Kirby Smart let him know about that, but at the end of the day, if I see that opening, I'm taking it, and also you got that shot out of it, so I think it's pretty cool at the end of the day. But Georgia heads into a huge one with Ole Miss this weekend. Auburn gets Missouri this weekend. Both of them are in a position where Auburn is in a position where if they don't get this win, I think Hugh Freeze is probably fired by Sunday. If I'm being totally honest, for Georgia, I think you got to get this win. Ole Miss coming off a game where they did not look the part by any means, and you're heading into a season where you still have Florida, you still have Texas later in the season, you still have Georgia Tech at the end of the season. You got to be careful. You got to find a way to get the win this weekend in Sanford, and it's a team that beat you last year. So a lot on the table for these two teams. This was a terribly, terribly officiated game, and the officials didn't take this game from Auburn, because if you gain 15 yards after the halftime, I don't really have a lot of sympathy for you. But let's get into the next game here. Another 20-10 result. LSU beat South Carolina 20-10. They were able to get the win here, and it was a good win. I shouldn't say it looks like a good win. It was a good win. It was a win where they handled their business, they did what they're meant to, and Garrett Nussmeier looked a little bit healthier, which is a massive thing for this football team. Still a couple of decisions where you're thinking, what are you doing, Garrett? I understand the arm talent is ridiculous, but let's calm down just a little bit. But at the end of the day, really talented kid, finally slowly getting healthy. If that's the difference, if he gets healthy at the right time, this defense is going to give him a chance to win every single game that they play, and that kid's going to make enough plays. He's going to do some really incredible things the rest of the season if he's healthy, and I think that's really up for debate. The rest of the season, especially when you got to face an Alabama here pretty soon, you're going to get hit pretty hard in that football game. So we'll see what happens with that the rest of the way. I'm having trouble fully buying into LSU. I was in the preseason, felt great about this team. Now I'm a little bit worried. They get Vanderbilt, A&M, and Alabama next. Huge games. If they find a way to win 2 out of 3, let's say, they're in really good shape moving forward. If they find a way to win all 3, watch out for LSU. They're moving forward with a lot of confidence, and I think if Garrett Nussmeier is healthy, they have the ability to win all 3 of those games. They have the ability to kind of vault themselves up to the top of the SEC and maybe be a national championship contender by the end of the year. A lot has to come together. I should say that, obviously, but at the end of the day, I think this LSU team has a really, really high ceiling. I think they're really, really far from reaching that. So we'll see what happens the rest of the way. South Carolina, I think you're the team in the SEC that was the sacrificial lamb this year, and that stinks. You got Lenore Sellers hurt early in that Vanderbilt game, and nothing's really been the same since. It was always going to go rough for one of the teams in the SEC this year. I tended to believe it was going to be South Carolina, and there we are. It was not going to be pretty this year, and I can't promise that 2026 is going to be better. I'll be totally honest. Now, what happens with Lenore Sellers will have a lot to do with that, but we'll see what happens the rest of the way. South Carolina is still a very dangerous team that could very well take down Oklahoma this weekend and totally turn the Sooners season on its head. BYU gets an overtime win over Arizona. They needed this one really badly. There's a couple of games coming up for BYU that if they didn't win this game, they could absolutely knock them out of the Big 12 championship. They were able to get it done. I think Bear Bachmeier needed this game. As weird as that sounds, he had 2 INTs on the road, and he found a way to get it done. His legs were huge in this game, went for, I believe, 78 on the ground, a couple of scores, really talented kid. And it's a kid that went on the road, had a tough performance, maybe one of his worst of his career, and he found a way to get the job done. And that's a huge credit to BYU and what they've been able to build over there. It's also a huge credit to Bear Bachmeier and being mentally tough enough to go into a tough environment and at the very least find a way to get through a tough performance with a win. But BYU gets the Holy War this weekend against Utah. It's one they probably need. They get Iowa State, Texas Tech, and Cincinnati still on the way. With how tough the Big 12 is going to be the rest of the way, I can't imagine they're going to be able to get through that unscathed. So probably need to beat Utah this weekend. It's going to be really interesting to watch that one. Arizona likely out of the Big 12 race, but they're a really dangerous team. With Noah Fifita playing good football, you have Houston, Colorado, Cincinnati, and Arizona State still ahead. They could knock one of those teams, especially Cincinnati or Arizona State, out of the Big 12 title if they get to that point and are still playing really good football over there. Arizona State got rolled, and it was one of those things that the second you saw Sam Levitt's news, you probably knew this was going to happen. Maybe not this aggressive, but when you don't have your starting quarterback, a lot goes wrong in a hurry, especially for Arizona State. Love Jeff Sims. You can't call nearly the offense that you can call with Sam Levitt with Jeff Sims. So at the end of the day, Utah was able to get the win. Dan Pierce's running ability is huge for this football team. That's something BYU is going to be watching. So might want to get a little bit more creative if you're Utah, but it handled the job on this Saturday. They get BYU this weekend, Colorado and Cincinnati right after. They absolutely could get back to the Big 12 title and hopefully set up a rematch with the team that beat them earlier in the season in Texas Tech. For Arizona State, still very much alive. You got to beat Texas Tech this weekend. I think everyone understands that. I think that's the reason that Sam Levitt did not play in that football game. I think he probably could have if he absolutely had to. But if they can win that one, everything's on the table, and they could totally change what the Big 12 is and what Texas Tech season is going forward. But at the end of the day, a huge win for Utah, one that they badly needed and one that Arizona State can come back from, but probably are walking a little bit of a tightrope, especially going into a massive game this weekend against Texas Tech. But a lot of really fun games. I think the biggest one to me was probably Texas. I think you look at that team going into this weekend, you're thinking, are they about to go 3-3 and maybe go 7-5 this year, where they lose to Oklahoma, they lose to Georgia, they lose to A&M? That wasn't all that crazy. That wasn't off the table by any means. And now they move forward, and there's a lot of optimism. Now, a lot of things to figure out over there in Austin still, a lot of things that they need to continue to improve on, but that's a team that can win a lot of football games. That's a team that can beat an A&M team later in the season. Probably got to continue to improve, but at the end of the day, a lot of optimism where there just wasn't any last week around Austin, but we'll get into that as it unfolds, of course. Let's take another break here. When we come back, let's just get to all the rest of the games. We got South Florida just rolling over North Texas, Ohio State, just being Ohio State. Ole Miss really struggling with Washington State. Texas A&M handled Florida in a number of other games right after this, so